lymph nodes. Okay, they're being engulfed by macrophages, perhaps, or other antigen-presenting cells. They're being processed and presented to T cells. They're also being presented to other cells like B cells or cytotoxic T cells. So we're triggering an immune response. Okay, we say that the antigen is immunogenic, generating an immune response. It takes about 10 to 12 days. And the first antibodies we begin to produce are IgM, and then that's followed by production of IgG. We have time switch in here. Okay, with this, we can kind of get a total antibody titer like this. We add these two. And it's going to take a little while for these antibodies then to coat the antigen and trigger control of the infection. Okay. Now, let's say time passes after that. It could be a month, it could be 6 months, it could be 10 years. And then, lo and behold, we're exposed to the antigen a second time. Now we have all of these memory cells that, wait, I've seen you before. You're not going to come in here now and propagate like you did last time. All right? They just complete that last step to full activation. Okay? And now all of a sudden, you're producing a clone of plasma cells within 24 hours that are generating antibodies, but at much higher titers because we have more cells than the first time. Okay? So, usually with this secondary response, IgM titers are relatively low compared to the IgG. Overall titers are much higher with this second exposure. Now, with the second exposure, by the way, because we trigger an immune response, we start to produce even more memory cells. So if that bacteria comes around a third time, no, it's not going to happen. All right, so this secondary response is called an anamnestic response. Anamnestic response, it's the only word to say. Can y'all say anamnestic?
Anamnestic.
No, some people like it. I like Abby. Abby just said no. It makes it easy. You don't have to go through the exercise.
Wait, how you say that?
Anamnestic.
Anamnestic. Got it.
Okay.
And that's the secondary
I'm not going to
response.
ask you to say this. Don't worry.
Are you just not going to ask Hunter, or are you going to not ask the whole class?
What's that?
Are you just not going to ask Hunter, or are you going to not ask?
I'm not going to ask the whole class. Okay.
Are you going to go back and talk about IgD, or did I miss that?
IG what?
D.
Oh, yeah. I haven't gotten there
You
yet.
left him out.
Well, we D. Game. GAMED.
Right.
Is it a ringer?
Yes, it's the Ringo. All right, so I'm going to come back to D.
Okay.
Okay.
Just
Now,
checking.
let's suppose you get a vaccination. They're using either one of two materials to vaccinate you with. They're either using a dead virus or a live attenuated. Attenuated means weakened so that it can't cause disease, theoretically. Although there have been some exceptions there. There's a very, very small chance that when you get a live attenuated virus vaccination, that it in fact can cause disease. It's not attenuated enough. But the advantage of a live attenuated vaccine is that it's a little bit more immunogenic than the dead virus. Okay. So you get this vaccination, like for instance, those of you who have to get the hepatitis B series. Okay, so you can go in one day and you can get the vaccine, and then maybe a month later, they're going to give you a second, and then maybe 6 months later, a third. You get a series.
For nursing?
Yeah, maybe for nursing or x-ray or whatever you're doing.
Oh.
Okay. Why do you think they give a series of 3 instead of just 1?
Get your body immune to it.
They want to build up high enough titers because with each exposure, you have another anamnestic response. And so each one, the titers go up still higher. Now, some of you may have gotten hepatitis B vaccination 5 years ago. Why? Because you were a candy striper. And they made you do that back in the day. Okay? You know what that is, do you? Okay.
Isn't that the person that like serves? What is it?
Like a volunteer.
Yeah,
Okay.
and they like serve water, help the patients.
Yeah, you're just kind of a patient assistant. Okay?
Yeah.
Or for some reason, like for instance, I know At one time, when I was still in college, I worked at a hospital, and they made me get a couple of different vaccinations. Okay, now, so let's suppose then you're entering into nursing school, and they say, well, you have to get the hepatitis B vaccine, and you say, well, I'm good already, I got it 5 years ago. They're gonna ask you to produce papers.
You have to check your titer, right?
And if you can't produce those papers, what's a body to do? Well, you get a blood test for serum antibody titers against hepatitis B. If you have elevated IgG titers against hepatitis B, then you're immune. You know, you have to meet a certain floor. It has to, you know, you have to reach a certain concentration, but typically if you've gotten vaccination before, then you'll have that adequate titer.
Don't you get it when you're little? Some people?
If you have an immune disorder.
Oh. Okay.
I don't know what the pediatric series includes now.
I
to be
thought
honest
that
with
it
you.
included Hep B, like now. I don't
It
know if
could,
it did
it
when
could.
I was little.
You know, that's a big job of pediatricians to keep children up with their vaccinations. But
Yeah.
I wouldn't be able to tell you much about what's required for a kid now.
When I
I'm
was
sure I have a list
interning,
laying around.
when I was interning, they made someone like show the paperwork for the vaccine and show their titers. They had to turn in both.
Wow. It was sticklers.
She did something in a hospital, but no, she was applying to some type of graduate program, but I don't know what it was.
Say something about. Oh, so IgD. All right. So what about IgD? Every class of antibody has something it's famous for. But as Jordan said, IgD is the Ringo. Okay, I'm sorry, my bad. Hunter, it's the Ringo. I don't feel bad for Ringo, by the way.
I know.
Yeah.
So the side drum.
Right. I feel bad for that guy, Pete Best, who was the drummer before Ringo. Got kicked out the band.
Yeah.
Wow, he lost out.
Nobody
Yeah.
knows who he is.
Yeah, I do,
Oh.
but most people don't. They've done a movie about him. Yeah, the Forgotten Beatle. All right, so IgD, what is its name? It's the least abundant of the immunoglobulins. It's the one that we know the least about. So where do we find ourselves in IgD? Well, sometimes, remember we talked about that B cells have immunoglobulins on their surface to allow them to recognize antigens? Well, that's where we find IgD. It's a receptor on B cells. Okay. But the truth is, we know otherwise, we don't know too much, and it's not. The titers of IgD in the blood are very, very low. So again, if you read any book, the one thing I'll say about it is it's the one we know least about. I'm trying to do something if I can do this. I don't know if I can do this. Okay. Okay. So natural, artificial, passive, and active. Let's see if I can bring this together. This is something a lot, I don't know if this is in your book or not. It's the 4 ways of acquiring specific immunity. That's like a square. Okay. Natural means just, as the name implies, it means that we come into contact with an antigen, you know, it's on the surface of a pathogen, for instance, in the natural course of life. Whereas if the contact is through a needle, that's artificial. So contact is either natural, like natural knowledge, or it's artificial. And then also, we differentiate between passive and active immunity. Passive is when we acquire the antibodies from somebody else. Whereas active is where our immune system generates its own antibodies. So there are 4 ways in which we acquire specific immunity. Natural, active immunity is where we come into contact with a pathogen. Okay, it causes disease, and we produce antibodies. So we now have immunity. But that immunity is born of the fact that our own immune system produced those antibodies in response to a natural event. We became infected. Okay. Can anybody think of an example of natural passive immunity?
From your mother.
Birth?
Yeah, let's say you're breastfeeding. Okay, a child is breastfeeding and picks up antibodies through the milk from the mother. Well, that's a natural event. But the child isn't producing their own antibodies, getting them from someone else. So it's passive. That's an example of a natural passive. Okay? Now, artificial, we said think needle. Can someone give me an example of artificial active immunity?
Vaccine.
Yeah, vaccine. Okay, we're exposed to a pathogen artificially via a needle, but our immune system produces its own antibodies. Okay. All right. Now we come to artificial passive. You don't think of this?
Mm-mm.
Let's
I was
suppose
gonna say AIDS, but I don't think that's right.
AIDS, no, that would be natural. Artificial, I'll give you an example. Let's suppose we hadn't received the hepatitis B vaccine. Okay. And maybe we're taking care of a relative that has hepatitis B, and we've been trained to take care of that relative, and we stick ourselves with the needle. Okay, that patient who's infected with hepatitis B, and we're not vaccinated. Okay? Then what's going to happen is, as a result of that exposure, you're going to go to the doctor, and he's going to give you pooled immunoglobulins to prevent development of hepatitis B. Pooled immunoglobulins. He's going to infuse it. In other words, this is a collection of antibodies from different people who have hepatitis B. And so those antibodies that you're receiving, you didn't generate yourself. So it's passive, not active. And it's artificial because it's delivered via a needle infusion. Okay? So those are 4 different ways in which we acquire specific immunity.
How would they get the antibodies from someone who has hepatitis B?
You know, I don't know. There are companies that do this kind of stuff, though.
Oh, is it kind of like if you get bit by a snake and you're given anti-venom?
Mm-hmm.
That'd be another example? Or is that different?
Let's see. Anti-venom. Yes. Yes, exactly the same.
Could you just take somebody's antibodies from their blood?
Can you take, what they usually do, anytime you see products from someone else, there's a certain type of purification that goes on. So it excludes any other types of antigens to which you could react. Okay? In fact, many times when you receive a blood transfusion, they wash those red blood cells that they're transfusing. So it washes away any other antigens other than what's on the red blood cell. In other words, they take it when you give a blood donation. That blood includes red blood cells and plasma.
Right.
They're going to separate the two.
Right.
Okay, forming packed red blood cells. Many times what they do now is they wash, and there's a machine that they go through where they wash off any surface antigens that don't belong to the red blood cells, lessens the likelihood that the recipient is going to develop some type of reaction. They call those washed red blood cells. All right. Wow, we spent a long time. All right, so let's pull out the microscopes.